Alright, y'all, welcome back to this Island Odyssey. I'm an animated tree stump, and whoever you are, make me a pizza! So this month I've once again decided to participate in Operation Edgelord, but I do have a bit of a disclaimer. While we did go in with the intention of this being the narrative contribution, it was kind of slapped together last minute, throwing whatever we had at whatever table we had. And to be honest, if one of my games in the next couple weeks absolutely slaps, that one's easily going to replace this one as my narrative contribution. But until then, this game is presumably ham-flavored. So I've once again brought out my JSA, and my opponent is someone who you may know and love, a fellow pink namer from the Infinity unofficial Discord, Hushhherism. And he's decided to bring out his nomads and take us to Tunguska. So, for the narrative overview. Yeah, we kind of went in with no plan here. Looking at the mission matrix, a lot of the options were vetoed in our playgroup, and I'm not seeing any open bounty requests I can take. And being that JSA is still a mercenary faction, we're not yet a vanilla, we decided to do one of the Bromad hot takes on res ops, and I guess I'll decide on some sort of narrative later, so Wise Kensai, you can take it or leave it. So as I mentioned, we're doing the revealed operations. In this mission, we are each pulling 3 tactical objective cards from the deck, and choosing 2, and combining them into a total of 4 tactical objective cards that between all 4, we can score a maximum of 10 objective points off of. So in this game, Tunguska wins the lieutenant roll-off and chooses to keep initiative, giving me a deployment, and we have a classic deploy first, go first situation for the nomads. So nothing out of the ordinary. So with that being said, let's get on to lists and deployment and get this show on the road. Okay, so this is the list that I brought, and first thing that I notice is, within this core team, you'll see that there's 2 Chump Keisetsu Combi Rifles, Kempe Tai, Keisetsu Paramedic, HMG. There is no Keisetsu Missile Launcher, mostly because I feel I didn't need the additional cheap ARO piece. If we go down further in the list, you'll see that I'm trying out this Ninja Multi-Sniper, as well as the classic Ryukin Heavy Rocket Launcher, plus the Ryukin SMG that I'm usually planning on putting into suppressive if I'm going second, and also knowing that he's bringing Tunguska, I expect to have a counterintelligence piece on the board in the form of the Puppet Tactica. That, and I have some supplemental AROs in the form of the Warcore and Chai Flash Pulses. And I was also hoping that there was some place that I could put this Oni Waban boarding shotgun on the board that would catch something with templates, or just, if going first, do Oni Waban things and boarding shotgun a core team or something silly. Also, as per usual, you don't build a JSA list, you don't leave home without your Yojimbo, and you've got the common inclusions for me with the Arigoto Killer Hacker, and the combo of Kuroshi Rider Lieutenant and a Kempe Chain of Command. And I've got some additional pieces to use for active turn burst in Samsa, hoping he gets deployed up close to rain plasma down, or the classic Pure Linked HMG to slang that burst from your deployment zone. You know how it works. Moving on to the Tunguska list. Hush is of course bringing the Puppet Tactica with Puppet Bots, as well as a really expensive core team, I would say. What with the double Interventors and the Grenzer that are inflating the cost. Here's where I'd like to point out that I haven't gotten the complete verification on what was run against me. I am guessing on these Interventors. I know one of them for sure had a boarding shotgun, and obviously the combi rifle boarding shotguns are interchangeable points-wise. I do not know what profile the Rounder had at all, but judging by the SWIC and points of this list, I feel like the Shock Marksman is the one that probably hit the table. For sure, the Securitate was a bare-bones combi rifle lieutenant, and the Grenzer was the marksmanship multi-sniper profile. I'm going to move on to Group 2 real quick. Some people might have noticed that there is a Vostok being fielded in a Harris alongside FTO Fiddler. and the FTO Forward Observer Stemplerzond. Additionally, you got the 2 Flashbot Transductorzons and double Zellenkrieger. I do not remember whether they were these heavy pistol profiles or if they were the light shotgun variants, but, there were 2 Zellenkriegers, there were 2 Flashbots, and I was told that there was a 7-1 and a 5-2 split, so to my best knowledge, this is the correct approximation of the list. I don't need to describe what a war core is doing, and with these 2 hacking devices, oh, I see, that's why I've got an X. This is definitely not the Lieutenant. It was 100% the Securitate. Don't mind that. Ignore it. But anyway, those 2 hacking devices and 1, 2, 3, 4 repeaters. It does make sense that we're going to see a Vertigo Zond to try to throw some guided missiles out. The only thing I would say this list is really sad and lacking is a Evo bot, just to throw some extra marksmanship onto this Vostok and really maximize its damage output. I know the more experienced Nomads players are probably going to yell about, no Hollow Men, or maybe Wolfgang or Den McConnelly or something. I don't know. I don't run the faction. But I do see we've got all the boxes checked off. We've got, multiple sources of really good burst. Plus the Zellens are decent warbands. Some ability to project your hacking net. The only thing I guess it's really light on is perhaps some scarier, harder AROs. Like, there's a couple of flashbots and a linked Grenzer multi-sniper, but nothing's really explosive or throwing down templates. And I think you're really only getting one lane to be super deadly with that core team. But I'm not really sure. Nomads are very much out of my wheelhouse. I can only speculate. But before we get on to the deployment, I will actually cut in with our mission objective. So like I said earlier, we were playing the revealed operations. So we end up choosing, and sorry for the blurriness, I guess there was some Sasquatch fur on the camera lens, but I end up deciding on decap, kill 1 enemy lieutenant, or 2 for 3 objective points. Guard the supply lines, that is 1 objective point at the end of the game for each of your own objectives that you control. Control, of course, being the only player who has models in silhouette contact and not in a marker state on it. And what Hush contributes to the pool is silence, that is succeeding on whip checks against enemy HVTs in line of fire and zone of control. So for 1 HVT it's 1, and for 2 HVTs it's 3 objective points. And last but certainly not least, we have Decimate the Enemy Forces. This is just a classic kill more. Every 25% of the enemy force is an additional objective point. Additionally, since we were playing quote-unquote res ops, we did draw the environment cards. So I end up revealing jungle combat, and I decide to put down the jungle sat zone templates. The other card I drew were the F-13 turrets, and normally going second, that's an auto pick for me every time. However, given the pieces in my army, the Ryukin and the Ninja Sniper, I felt that sat zone was going to more heavily impact and favor my setup than his, whereas the F-13 turrets sometimes end up being pretty neutral in delaying both players. And then Hush ends up helping me out quite a bit with Storm, which gives X-Visor, MSV, and Bio-Visor units +1 to ballistic skill. Reason being is that Grenzer and I think the Rounder have visors, but so do my Ryukins. Moving on to the table, so I think I commit the common fallacy where like 90% of the reason why I chose this side of the table is because I put my stuff down on it first and it looks pretty good. So what we end up having is there's 3 really big buildings set up in the center of the board that heavily restrict line of fire, and a relatively open area on the left-hand side. Let me clear these out. But there are some pretty pivotal terrain features that do sway me to stay on this side. First is actually this tall tower in the back here. And while that looks really annoying for the Ryukin SMG to set up on, I find that this building ends up restricting the tower's line of fire to down this way and down this way, which also means that a standing model on top of it can get engaged on from this corner, this corner, this corner, up here, back here, any range all the way across the entire left-hand side of this table. Or the Ryukin can post up right behind this billboard, and peeking out, they'll have access to this corridor, and typically get stopped by these billboards. And that looks all well and good, but this building ends up being the real moneymaker for me. And that's because the Ryukin can get onto this corner, cover this whole section of the board, and cut across this line, assuming she starts in suppressive fire. Lastly, because of the way this table is set up, I feel like the right side of the board, my opponent gets funneled into one of two corridors, and with my thoughts of bringing the Oniwaban boarding shotgun, over-infiltrating into one of those obvious routes looks really good. Also, it jumps out to me that if I put the Ryukin on the premium lookout spot, I get another tall corner with the option to put the Ninja Multi-Sniper that also covers this really open field and gets this devastating cross-table line that sees all the way off the end of the game mat. So with that all in mind, I end up putting the sat zones here and in this obvious crossfire spot, because looking at lines of fire, I noticed that a Ryukin HRL could peek around this corner and also get lines into this area behind that central diagonal building. And as we all know, when you're shooting one shot in ARO, the saturation zone is at its most beneficial. So, in theory, this ARO setup's looking really good for me. Okay, so moving on to Tunguska's deployment, we end up with the core team beamed up in this corner, centered around this building, and the Vostok Fiddler whatever Harris has got a nice central location to push out and engage either this way or stuff over here. Flashbots are both looking down that open field, as well as crossing to the left in that corridor as well. Now we also have the Zellenkriegers, one here and one behind this building over here. Both of them actually end up rolling 8-4 movement on their metacam charts. So assuming that some smoke happens here and perhaps over here, then those warbands could potentially get really annoying with ability to 8-inch cautious move and maybe even funnel onto the back of that billboard or break around the sides to try to dig at my flanks. Last, I'll point out the Puppet Tactica. He put his mine over here, and the puppet bots are located in the center, which again gives you flexibility to, go left, right, or barrel straight through over the top of this building, depending on how my JSA deployment works out. Last thing I guess to go over is I'll point out the objectives for the ResOps missions. Beacons don't matter, but the objectives and HVTs do. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 HVTs, and we've got 1, 2, 3 objectives. Alright, now on to JSA shenanigans. Starting on my left side, I put the core team around these billboards and behind this building. They're mostly just tucked, safe, and inaccessible, with the exception of the HMG, who has a very thin line, so that he can contest a model specifically walking on the ground around this billboard. I did put the Ryukin in the spot that I talked about earlier, and I've got Kuroshi Rider. I actually didn't bring all of my models to the game store, so I had to borrow one of Steve's Knights of Montesa to represent her. But she's got 2 cargo crates stacked in front of her, so she's pretty much uninteractable where she's standing. I choose to have her be impetuous this game, because I feel like unless something is standing on this spot, it looks like she's going to have free access to shove up this way. Whereas my other bikers, Yojimbo and the Aragoto, I choose to have not impetuous. Aragoto for obvious reasons, just to allow me to have access to Cyber Mask. But for Yojimbo, that was more of a gut feeling than anything else. Yojimbo actually ends up putting his Crazy Claw on the ground on this side. And as for my other deployables, the Ryukin put a mine on the ground besides this billboard. And my Ryukin HRL that I haven't gotten to deploys a mine back behind this corner. I have a beacon, HVT, and objective all kind of in a line in this corner, so I kind of wanted to make them harder to access. Heading back to the center, this does look like kind of a wild spot for the Chai-Yi flashbot, but that's only because of the perspective. You really only see is out here, straight across, gets blocked by these billboards until like right here, and then into this line. So you really have to be deep on my side of the table before interacting with him becomes a possibility. Last, before I get into my hidden deployments, I've got a Warcore and a Ryukin that are doing a good job looking to the left to deter enemy models from walking straight across the board. Oh, objectives. Okay, so the relevant ones, I've got HVT, HVT, HVT on the ground, and HVT behind this building in the corner. And then I've got objective, objective on the roof, and objective on the ground back here. But anyway, moving on to my hidden deployments. I put a ninja multi-sniper on the building on the left-hand side of my deployment zone, and you can see that he's overlooking that big open field on the left. And the real scary one is the Oni Wabon, who ends up succeeding on his over-infiltration roll, and he's right in front of that core team. Like, that's the Grenzer. The interventors are on the ground back here. And Steve, from my previous battle reports, was at the table spectating the game, and, you know, he was saying, this looks really scary. You know, one wrong move, or just letting me go to active turn, there's an Oni Wabon boarding shotgun in front of your core team. That is never a good place to be. Last couple of things before we get into the real game. I put Samsa on the roof behind the objective, and he's my reserve troop. Tunguska actually does not place a reserve troop. They put all 15 down at once. And when I'm presented order count, the Ryukin goes into suppressive fire state. So now I guess we're ready to move on to Tunguska turn 1. Alright, so to start off Tunguska's turn 1, in the words of David Attenborough, here we have the Zellenkrieger in his natural habitat, moving in a straight line toward the enemy deployment zone, and dodging slightly to the left. Continuing on with the impetuous phase, this Zellenkrieger, who looks surprisingly like Denmark Connolly, also moves in a straight line, but opts to throw smoke around the corner. Alright, enough of that. So anyway, definitely not Den McConnelly walks up through the smoke and tucks in behind the billboard, and I believe at this point Hush tries a overconfident, speculative smoke in front of the Ryukin on the building, fails, and then tries a less confident in line of fire smoke onto this platform, also fails. So then he's forced to reevaluate what he's doing with the rest of his Group 2 orders. Next we have the left flank Zellenkrieger, and he started behind this corner, moves up and around, and ends up catching the eye of the Ryukin on the building. So I do my suppressive fire and he tries to throw smoke in the way. The Ryukin ends up winning this exchange and the Zellenkrieger goes unconscious. And some of you might say, oh, he's 8-4, why doesn't he just cautious move? And while that works in theory, that does not account for the ninja having that line, and I believe the Oni Wabon in the corner also sees from behind. So either of those hidden ARO pieces would have actually made a cautious move even more disastrous for the Zellenkrieger. So the smoke had to go down first, but at the same time, the combat group's really running out of orders to do something meaningful. Because we had like 3 spent on not Denma, Irregular spent over here, so there's like 2 or 3 left in the group. So instead, we try to do stuff with Group 1. The Stemplar jumps onto this building, the Vostok comes around the corner, and Fiddler makes her way up here. And that happens to be the moment where I ask to pause and check line of fire, because my hidden ninja sniper sees both Fiddler and the Vostok crossing the gap. And even though the Vostok is the team lead, I elect to shoot Fiddler, and that's because all she can do is dodge back at me. And with my Mim 6, Vostok not having an MSV and a saturation zone between us, I feel like I've leveraged enough modifiers that the ninja is unlikely to go down to the Vostok's Mark 12 if he wants to go for the trade. However, the fire team does dodge, so the ninja misses his shot on Fiddler, but now he's also got to dig himself out of the Ryukin HRL cutting this line. So the Vostok chooses to push up to the right and look at the ninja who I've perfectly cropped out of the scene. And I believe he splits his shots 1 on the ninja and 3 over from the Ryukin on the left, which gets reduced down to 2 because of the sat zone. But since we got some hot Mim 6 on Mim 6 on Mim 6 action, I think everyone ends up whiffing here, and at the end of the day, the Vostok has moved out of line of fire of the Ryukin, and can hopefully deal with some slightly easier face-to-faces on the ninja. At some point also, the puppet bots jump up onto this building, and they've got the ninja looking this way, and a Ryukin and Warcore that are cutting over here. So my understanding was to dodge into this quadrant where there happens to be a blind spot between my AROs. Unfortunately, they're fizz garbage and don't make it. Finishing off the turn, we get a reposition of the fire team. The rounder moves up to this corner. This back interventor moves around. This front interventor moves around. And the Grenzer gets onto this corner so that he can look into this courtyard area and try to prevent JSA from, flooding into his backline. Now here's also where the first hint of impending disaster comes in. My Oni Wabon is hidden right here, and so I decided to check some lines of fire. So it turns out my only options here were to hit just the rounder, hit just the interventor, or hit just the Grenzer. And to be honest, I feel like I could be a little bit more greedy, keep him held back, and hopefully get a bigger payoff, either in my active turn or on the reactive with Nomad's turn 2. And if you're in the Bromad Discord and we're paying attention, I think you know what ends up happening. So, moving on to bottom of turn 1, JSA. I neglected to mention that the Vostok did get 1 hit onto the ninja, so I did end up making the armor save and dropping prone and moving a bit off to the side here. But between him and my Ryukin SMG and my core team, I feel like I've got a perfect toolbox to dismantle his setup and start steamrolling. So here's what we do. The Ryukin SMG nudges up slightly and gets to burst down the transductor Zond, and that opens up my Keisotsu to move up, around, forward, and to the side to form a figure 5, and try to land some shots on the transductor Zond back here. Now the flashbot does get hit, but survives and goes prone, but that does open up the possibility of my ninja sniper taking some shots over his head. Next order of business, I skipped over my impetuous phase. Kuroshi Rider did exactly as I said before, zooms forward. So I notice there's a big gaping hole in the defense of the Nomads. The Vostok is right here, behind the corner of this building. So Yojimbo's plan of attack is to move up, throw this smoke, move up again, throw this crazy koala, move up a third time, and apply CC 1 million. And that's exactly what happens. The Vostok ends up taking, I believe, 3 damage between a Yojimbo crit and a crazy koala. However, he does get targeted for his efforts. Sorry that this is a post-game picture, but I did also get a chance to activate Samsa during this turn, so if you'll remember, the puppet bots were sitting up on this roof at the end of Tunguska's turn 1, which unfortunately makes some prime targets for Samsa to jump over to about this spot, and then find the imaginary point in space where he can put a line onto one of the puppet bots' heads, and he happens to catch both of them under the splash of plasma. Now, fortunately for Nomads, those are durable bots, but unfortunately, they do both end up unconscious at the end of the turn. So with both the puppet bots and the Vostok down, I've just got some repositioning to do, and I'm looking really hot going into turn 2. So after neutralizing that threat, I find it an opportune time to have my SMG Ryukin drop a mine at the top of these stairs just off screen and re-enter suppressive fire state. So now she's got an even tighter angle, and if not Denma wants to interact with her, he'll either have to drop chain rifles, or he's going to have to do a full order jump or climb because the stairs are blocked off. You can't walk up there. And with a couple orders left in the turn, the Ninja Sniper ends up splitting Burst onto the War Core and the Flashbot. And this is just sort of a Hail Mary attempt. I do end up putting the Flashbot fully unconscious. However, the War Core still stands. And then in a rare case, I have this War Core make use of his irregular order. And by walking up to this corner, I've just got a much better line of fire into that, courtyard plaza area. Now we're into the start of Tunguska, top of turn 2, and here's the pivotal moment that I think decides the game. In order to move the Grenzer down, as well as avoid some of the nasty ARO pieces that JSA has in the area, the fire team decides to do a full order jump. Now, if you'll recall, my Oni Wabon was in hidden deployment right here. So when the movement gets finalized, we have the Securitate, Interventor number 1, Interventor number 2, already pointed out the Grenzer, and Rounder, all moving up. And at that moment, I have to ask Hush to turn around. I verify that my Oni Wabon has a line straight across these 3 models, so I elect to reveal and drop a free boarding shotgun template across them, which the Interventor and the Grenzer survive, but takes out the Rounder. And following this revelation, the fire team is forced to respond, so the next order tucks this Interventor up to the wall, this one jumps around the corner, and the Grenzer moves to the side. The Oni Wabon maintains the same line he had before at the end of the order, so I drop a boarding shotgun template on all 3 of those models again, and Hush decides to drop 3 boarding shotgun templates of his own from the Interventor onto my Oni Wabon to just immediately take it out. Unfortunately, in this trade, the Grenzer ends up going down, the Rounder goes fully dead, the Interventor survives, but the Oni Wabon gets obliterated. And while the neutering of that fire team is a tough pill to swallow, Nomads has a second problem in the form of Yojimbo, who is still alive, and though he is targeted, he is standing next to the Vostok's body, which makes him illegal for guided missile strikes. So the play here was to have Definitely Not Denma throw a smoke up in this area to cover his advance, and then run all the way in and try to contest Yojimbo. Now, Hush tries to make the play that preserves the Zellenkrieger, so he chooses not to berserk. However, Yojimbo ends up winning the face-to-face, so he's just left with his wound from previous turn, and leaves the Zellenkrieger unconscious. And at this point, taking stock of the situation Nomads has left, we have a Puppet Tactica who is prone on this roof without puppet bots, Fiddler, the Vostok. Down that way, we have the 2 Interventors and Securitate, with the Securitate being the obvious lieutenant, a War Core, and a Missile Bot, and JSA has only lost the Oni Wabon. Group 2 is basically non-existent because they got folded into Group 1 with all the command tokens, and Nomads is currently left with 8 models standing. And there's also no guns long range enough to contest any of the ARO pieces that I've got up, so we call the game at this point, but I play out my turn 2 just for appearance's sake. So to close out the turn, the Ryukin jumps down and touches this objective, and my Keisotsu team pushes the HMG up just to provide further overwatch on this corner. My Arigoto zooms up and touches this objective. Samsa is able to execute a corpse in this area, while also securing my center objective. And Kuroshi Rider zooms up around this corner, succeeds on a whip check against this HVT, and then tries her luck at a couple of face-to-faces against the Vostok, but we end up bouncing. So then to end out the game, we come back to this scene, and Yojimbo spends his Irregular to secure this HVT. So if we go back to mission objectives, no one's killed any lieutenants. I'm touching 3 of my own objectives. I've silenced 2 enemy HVTs, and I'm at least at 2 objective points from decimate enemy forces. But if turn 3 were to happen and I kill 1 or 2 things, then that's an easy 3 points. Or my Aragoto can just abuse the movement speed and gun for the obvious lieutenant and get me 2 points of decapitate. Either way, I'm looking at a minimum of 9, but probably 10 objective points. So we end up pretty unfortunately one-sided. And I think this game just gets won off the back of my hidden deployed troopers being absolutely clutch. This is a textbook example of like how to win the game in the deployment phase. I think if we go back to this spot, there's really not a lot you can do even with outside knowledge. The problem is this core team absolutely has to move up to be relevant, and at some point some of the stragglers that funnel through this area will show up in front of the Oniwaban and they will get templated. There's really not a lot you can do. Like, maybe you try to preserve the fire team with some 50-50 dodges, but once the Oniwaban's revealed, you've lost all your momentum. I think that perhaps the only thing you can do to avoid that situation is to go all the way back to deployment, where you still have a chance to realize that the Grenzer in this area is just extremely closed off with buildings blocking all in front of him. And in order to leverage the sniper, you probably want to be over on this side, so that he's able to possibly contest this long line and overwatch the giant open area on the board. And then you'll still have the chance for either him or the rounder to move out into this kind of spot and try to take some fights from different range bands there. Plus, when you do that, then you can move the Vostok and the puppet bots back over to that side of the board, where the closed, cramped spaces will favor their 24-inch guns and the Vostok's movement abilities. Like, having Spiderbot walk up over to the side or doing some weird stuff over up on this tower would have been really interesting to see, and it's really unfortunate that the game did not play out that way. Either way, I guess I'm getting pretty JSA'd out here, so I'm going to try to bust out some Morat Aggression Force, or possibly something else new in the next couple of weeks. So, once again, stay tuned. See ya, nerds.